galactic combat trials had been a long-standing tradition, a sacred event meant to determine the most advanced and powerful species in the known universe. It was not simply about war. It was about dominance, strategy, and the raw power of a civilization's military capability. Every 50 years, the most formidable warriors of each species gathered in the grand halls of the interstellar combat arena, a massive coliseum that floated in neutral space, untouched by any planetary jurisdiction. Its gravity and atmospheric conditions were carefully adjusted for each event, ensuring that no species had an unfair environmental advantage. This time, the arena was more crowded than ever. Thousands of delegates, generals, scientists, and spectators filled the observation decks. Holographic projectors displayed the names and records of previous champions, the faces of legendary warriors who had led their people to victory in past centuries. The air buzzed with excitement as the competing species arrived, each bringing their finest warriors. The Exorthal, towering reptilian behemoths covered in thick armored scales, moved with a heavy, deliberate grace that spoke of their raw strength. The Varath, a species of cybernetically enhanced humanoids, entered with a confident stride, their bodies gleaming with polished metal plating and neural interface ports that linked them directly to their combat AI systems. The Lithari, agile beings with 4 arms and a unique ability to manipulate gravitational fields, floated effortlessly above the ground, exuding an aura of effortless superiority. Then, the humans arrived. Their entrance was quiet, almost unimpressive compared to the spectacle of the others. No battlesuits, no war drones, no cybernetic enhancements. Just a handful of men and women dressed in simple military fatigues, their postures straight, their gazes unwavering. They carried no weapons, wore no armor, and lacked any visible technological modifications. The murmurs began immediately. "Are they serious?" a Virath general scoffed, his voice laced with disbelief. "They've come unarmed. They've brought nothing to the trials. Are they expecting to negotiate their way to victory?" Azorthal warlord chuckled, the deep rumbling of his throat reverberating across the room. "They do not understand the purpose of this competition. This is not diplomacy. This is war." Despite the dismissive laughter, the human delegation remained composed. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Colonel Nathan Cole, stood at the front of the group, his expression unreadable. He did not react to the mocking voices, nor did he attempt to explain their presence. He simply waited for the official proceedings to begin. A few minutes later, the Grand Arbiter of the Trials, an ancient being from the Elthari race, floated onto the central podium. The Elthari were a species known for their neutrality and wisdom, their crystalline forms pulsing with an inner light that reflected their vast intellect. The Grand Arbiter's voice, smooth and resonant, carried through the chamber. "Warriors of the galactic combat trials, welcome. As it has been for millennia, these battles will determine the strongest combatants in the known universe. You are here to prove your species' might, not just through brute force, but through strategy, skill, and the ability to adapt to any challenge. The rules remain unchanged. Each warrior will face multiple opponents in combat, using the tools and technologies their species deems necessary. There are no restrictions beyond the ban on mass destruction weaponry. Only one question remains." The Arbiter's crystalline form pulsed as his gaze settled on Colonel Cole. "Humanity, are you prepared?" Cole stepped forward, his movements deliberate, controlled. "We are," he said simply. The murmurs grew louder. Exorthal commander sneered. "Then where are your weapons, human?" Cole did not blink. "We brought them with us." Confusion rippled through the chamber. Several species exchanged glances, puzzled by the statement. Some assumed it was a bluff, a meaningless display of bravado. Others considered the possibility that humans possessed hidden weaponry, something undetectable to scanners. But no one believed that a species could enter the trials with no visible means of combat and expect to survive. The Arbiter, though intrigued, did not challenge Cole's statement. "Very well. The trials will begin at first light. May the strongest warriors prevail. As the assembly dispersed, the human delegation remained standing, watching as the other species moved toward their respective barracks, discussing battle strategies, fine-tuning their weapons, and running final combat simulations. The humans, on the other hand, did none of these things. Instead, they retreated to a quiet chamber where they engaged in a ritual unfamiliar to the other species. Preparation through stillness. No technology, no last-minute adjustments, just focus. They had spent years training for this moment. Every strike, every movement, every reaction had been drilled into their bodies until combat was not something they did, it was something they were. The night before the battles began, the Grand Arbiter received a private communication from a Lithari observer. "They are unarmed," the Lithari said. "Surely this is a misunderstanding. Perhaps they intended to bring weapons and failed to secure the proper transport?" The Arbiter's crystalline form dimmed slightly as he considered the statement. "No," he said finally. "They know exactly what they are doing." By morning, the entire Galactic Council had already decided the outcome of humanity's participation. They would be eliminated in the first round. There was no way an unarmed species could compete against the galaxy's finest warriors. The humans had already lost. Or so they thought. The morning of the first combat trials arrived with an almost ceremonial stillness. The arena, an immense coliseum with towering energy barriers, stood at the center of the station, its floor a vast, shifting landscape designed to simulate different planetary terrains. The combatants had been assigned their first opponents, and the audience filled the observation decks, eager to witness the raw spectacle of war. The air hummed with tension as warriors prepared for their first matches. A Zorthal champion adjusted the energy output of his plasma gauntlets, their glow pulsing in sync with the movements of his scaled hands. A Varath soldier performed final diagnostics on his neural uplink, ensuring a seamless connection between his mind and the battle drone assigned to support him. The Lithari combatants hovered effortlessly above the ground, their gravitic fields distorting the air around them. The humans, however, remained still. Colonel Nathan Cole stood with his team, watching as the other species fine-tuned their weaponry. He glanced at the schedule on the massive holo-display above the arena, his gaze settling on the first match of the day. It would be between a Zorthal warrior and a Varath enforcer, two of the most technologically advanced combatants in the tournament. The perfect demonstration of what the trials had always been about. The Grand Arbiter's voice echoed through the arena. "The first match will now begin." The floor beneath the combatants shifted, solidifying into a cracked, volcanic battlefield, complete with jagged stone formations and rivers of simulated magma. The audience roared with excitement as the Zorthal warrior took his place, his massive frame bristling with weapons. His plasma gauntlets crackled with energy, and a retractable blade extended from his wrist, its surface shimmering with molecular disruption technology. Across from him, the Varath enforcer stood motionless, his cybernetic implants feeding tactical data directly into his brain. A sleek combat drone floated behind him, scanning the battlefield and preparing to deploy suppression fire. The signal sounded. The Zorthal moved first, launching forward with terrifying speed for a being of his size. His plasma gauntlet ignited, sending an arc of searing energy toward his opponent. The Varath dodged effortlessly, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to weave through the attack like liquid metal. His drone fired in retaliation, releasing a barrage of high-velocity plasma rounds. The Zorthal activated his personal shield, deflecting the incoming fire, and countered with a devastating ground slam, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. The fight was brutal. Each combatant executed complex maneuvers with precision, demonstrating their species' mastery of warfare. The Zorthal relied on sheer power, his strikes capable of leveling entire buildings. The Varath countered with relentless efficiency, using calculated strikes and tactical positioning to minimize damage. After nearly 10 minutes, the match reached its climax. The Varath drone fired a concentrated energy beam, piercing through the Zorthal's shield. The reptilian warrior staggered, but with a final surge of strength he lunged forward, catching the enforcer in his grasp. With a bone-crushing squeeze, he lifted the cybernetic warrior into the air and slammed him into the ground. The Arbiter raised his hand. "Victory to the Zorthal!" The audience erupted in cheers. This was what they had come for. An exhibition of power, skill, and superior weaponry. The next few matches followed the same pattern, each fight a showcase of lethal technology and martial prowess. Then the display updated with the next match. Human combatant vs. ex-Zortal champion. The crowd murmured in anticipation. This was it. The moment everyone had been waiting for. Nathan Cole stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Across from him, the Zortal champion loomed, nearly twice his height, his armored body a fortress of muscle and scales. His plasma gauntlets pulsed with barely restrained energy, and his retractable blade gleamed with deadly anticipation. The Arbiter's voice rang through the arena. "Combatants, prepare!" The battlefield shifted, transforming into a dense jungle environment, complete with towering trees, shifting undergrowth, and the simulated calls of alien wildlife. The Zortal flexed his claws, his eyes locking onto Cole with a predator's gaze. The signal sounded. The Zortal moved first, closing the distance between them in an instant. His plasma gauntlet ignited, sending a searing arc of energy toward Cole's chest. The crowd expected him to dodge, to stumble, to panic. Instead, he stepped forward. The energy passed within inches of his body as he pivoted smoothly to the side. His movement was precise, controlled, as if he had predicted the attack before it had even been made. The Zorthal followed up with a sweeping strike, his blade cutting through the air with deadly intent. Cole ducked, the blade missing him by a fraction of an inch. Then he countered. His fist struck the Zorthal's exposed ribcage with a force that defied expectations. The impact reverberated through the arena, and for the first time the towering warrior staggered. The crowd gasped. The Zorthal roared in fury, his movements becoming more aggressive. He swung his massive arm, aiming to crush Cole in a single blow. Again the human moved with impossible speed, dodging the attack with an efficiency that seemed almost unnatural. Then came the second strike, a precise, devastating blow to the Zorthal's knee joint. The warrior's leg buckled, and before he could recover, Cole had already repositioned. The third strike landed at the base of his skull, a pinpoint attack that sent a shockwave through his nervous system. The Zortal collapsed. Silence fell over the arena. No one moved, no one spoke. The Arbiter hesitated before finally raising his hand. Victory to the human! For the first time in the history of the trials, a warrior had won a match without using a single weapon. The arena remained in stunned silence. The Exorthal champion, a warrior whose strength had been proven in dozens of previous battles, lay motionless on the ground. Nathan Cole stood over him, his breathing controlled, his posture perfectly balanced, as if he had exerted no effort at all. The Grand Arbiter hesitated for a fraction of a second before officially declaring his victory. Then the uproar began. Shouts of disbelief echoed through the observation decks. The Zorthal delegation erupted in rage, their voices a mixture of growls and roars. A general from their faction slammed a clawed fist against the reinforced railing, his scaled face twisted in fury. "This is a disgrace," he bellowed, his voice carrying over the chaos. "That human used some kind of trickery. No unarmed combatant can defeat a Zortal warrior in direct battle." The murmurs spread. Others began to question what they had just witnessed. The Lithari, their four eyes blinking in rapid succession, whispered among themselves, trying to analyze what had occurred. The Virath representatives, ever logical, ran countless battle simulations on their neural implants, searching for explanations. Yet none of their calculations made sense. Cole ignored the commotion. He simply stepped away from his fallen opponent and walked back toward the human delegation, his expression unchanged. His teammates didn't congratulate him. There was no cheering, no celebration. They had expected this outcome. They had trained for it. A few moments later, medical drones entered the battlefield, scanning the unconscious Zortel. His vital signs were stable, but his nervous system had gone into a temporary state of shock. His muscles, which had been biologically engineered for endurance and raw power, had been disabled in seconds. The scans revealed no fractures, no external damage, only pinpoint strikes that had disrupted his ability to function. The arena officials conferred privately with the Arbiter, their voices hushed. No one had ever seen a fight end like this before. The trials had always been about technology, brute strength, and superior firepower. Hand-to-hand combat was considered primitive, an outdated relic of civilizations that had long since evolved past such crude means of warfare. Yet here stood the undeniable proof. The Arbiter finally raised his crystalline hand to silence the crowd. His glowing form pulsed with quiet authority. "The results stand," he announced, his voice unwavering. "The human is victorious. The next match will proceed as scheduled." The Exorthal general growled, but did not challenge the ruling. He knew that to openly defy the Arbiter would be political suicide. However, his glare remained fixed on Cole, his slitted eyes filled with seething fury. This was not over. As the next fighters were called to the battlefield, the human delegation quietly exited the arena floor. The other competitors, however, no longer looked at them with indifference. Suspicion and unease filled their gazes. The humans had come unarmed, and yet they had won. That changed everything. Hours later, deep within the station's military sector, a private meeting was underway. Representatives from multiple factions had gathered, seated around a circular table made of reinforced alloy. The room, illuminated by cold blue lights, was lined with holographic displays showcasing combat footage from the match. A Lithari tactician, his elongated fingers twitching with nervous energy, replayed the battle for the 5th time. The slowed-down footage captured every movement in painful detail. "This is not possible," he muttered, adjusting the playback speed. "Look at the way he moves, the precision, the reaction time, the efficiency of the strikes. This was not mere skill. This was calculation at a level we do not understand." A Vorath intelligence officer leaned forward, his cybernetic implants pulsing with data streams. "Humans are not known for their physical superiority. Their biology is unremarkable compared to other species. Their skeletal structure is fragile. Their muscle density is lower than that of most warrior races. Yet this," he gestured to the frozen frame of Cole, striking the Zorthal's nerve points, "this suggests otherwise." A Zorthal warlord slammed his fist against the table, his scaled knuckles leaving a dent in the metal. "This was deception. No species can fight like this without enhancements." A silence followed. No one could argue against what they had seen, yet none of them could fully comprehend it. Finally, a voice cut through the tension. "There is only one way to know for certain." The others turned toward the source. A representative from the Galactic Military Council, a neutral observer who had remained silent until now, leaned back in his chair. His pale skin and featureless eyes gave no indication of emotion. "The next match will reveal the truth. We must see if this was a fluke, or if humanity possesses something the rest of us do not." The decision was made. In the human barracks, the atmosphere remained unchanged. Cole sat with his team, casually reviewing the list of upcoming matches. He showed no concern, no interest in the rumors swirling throughout the station. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing the Arbiter's insignia. "Colonel Cole," the Arbiter's voice carried a weight of authority, "your next opponent has been selected." Cole studied the information. "A Lithiari combat master. Agile, fast, capable of manipulating gravity fields to distort his surroundings. A formidable opponent, no doubt. The arbiter hesitated before speaking again. There are those who question the legitimacy of your victory. They believe your combat abilities are unnatural, that you are using something beyond mere skill. Cole's expression remained neutral. And what do you believe? The arbiter paused. I believe in results. Your next fight will determine whether humanity's strength is a reality or an illusion. The transmission ended. Cole closed the display and turned to his team. Looks like we have their attention. A few of his soldiers exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this reaction before. It was always the same. The disbelief, the suspicion, the growing realization that humanity had an advantage no one else could understand. The next fight would be different. The others would be watching more closely, studying every movement, analyzing every strike. Cole rolled his shoulders, exhaling slowly. Good, let them watch. The next battle was set. The announcement spread across the station like wildfire, and by the time the hour of the match arrived, the observation decks were overflowing with spectators. Diplomats, military leaders, intelligence officers, and warriors from every species gathered to witness what had now become the most anticipated fight of the trials. The Lithari delegation had selected their finest combat master, a fighter known for his unparalleled agility and precision. His name was Kareth, a warrior whose reputation had been forged through decades of unbroken victories. Unlike the Zortal, who relied on brute force, the Lithari were artists of movement, bending gravity around themselves to enhance their speed and make their strikes unpredictable. Kareth was the pinnacle of their combat philosophy, a fighter who had never been touched in battle. As the arena prepared for the fight, the landscape shifted once more. The battlefield transformed into a zero-gravity combat zone, an environment designed to remove the limitations of solid ground. Floating debris simulated the wreckage of a destroyed space station, creating an unpredictable battlefield of shifting cover and open void. It was the perfect setting for a Lithari warrior, whose mastery of gravitational manipulation would make him nearly untouchable. Nathan Cole stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching as Kareth floated into position. The Lithari's four arms moved in synchronized precision, his body adjusting effortlessly to the lack of gravity. His violet-hued skin shimmered under the arena lights, the thin energy bands wrapped around his wrists pulsing with stored gravitational energy. He was not just a warrior, he was a living weapon, capable of altering the flow of battle at will. The murmurs from the crowd were filled with anticipation. The Exorthal warriors, still seething from the previous fight, watched with narrowed eyes, their skepticism evident. The Virath intelligence officers had already begun analyzing potential weaknesses, while the Galactic Council representatives observed in silence, waiting for confirmation of what they had suspected since the last match. The Grand Arbiter's voice rang out. Combatants, prepare. Kareth extended his forearms, the energy bands around his wrists flaring to life. The gravitational field around him distorted, bending light and shifting the debris into an orbit of controlled movement. He was already dictating the battlefield before the fight had even begun. Cole remained motionless, his body relaxed, his breathing steady. He made no attempt to adjust to the environment, no indication that the weightless battlefield concerned him in any way. The signal sounded. Kareth moved instantly. His body blurred as he propelled himself forward, twisting through the debris with inhuman grace. His arms extended, striking from impossible angles, each attack reinforced by precise gravitational shifts that made his movements faster than the eye could follow. The first strike came within a fraction of a second, a spinning kick aimed at Cole's temple, a strike that had ended countless matches before this one. Cole didn't dodge. He moved just enough to alter the trajectory of the kick, his body shifting with the slightest tilt. The attack grazed past him, missing its mark by millimeters. Kareth adjusted mid-air, twisting his body into a fluid rotation that transitioned into a rapid series of strikes, each one striking from a different direction. His forearms created a whirlwind of attacks, his gravitational distortions pulling Cole into the strike zones, leaving him nowhere to escape. Except, he didn't need to escape. Cole's movements were precise, economical. He didn't waste energy dodging unnecessarily. He simply shifted his body, positioning himself at the exact angles that disrupted Kareth's attacks before they could fully form. Each of the Lithari's blows missed by impossibly small margins, turning what should have been a flurry of devastating strikes into nothing more than wasted motion. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Kareth's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Something he had never experienced before. Doubt. He increased the gravitational output of his wristbands, accelerating his movements beyond the limits of organic reaction time. He struck again, his attacks now so fast that even the Varath's combat AI struggled to track them. Cole moved, not away, not defensively. He moved toward Kareth, and then he struck. It was a single, devastating blow. So fast, so precise that even those watching from the highest vantage points barely saw it happen. Cole's fist drove into Kareth's chest, not with brute force, but with the exact amount of pressure needed to disrupt his internal equilibrium. Kareth's body locked up, his gravitational control faltered, the energy bands flickered and died. For the first time in his life, Kareth felt what it was like to be helpless in battle. His body spun uncontrollably through the zero-gravity battlefield, no longer in control of his movement. The very thing that had made him the perfect warrior, his mastery of gravity, had been turned against him. Cole didn't follow up. He didn't need to. The match was already over. Kareth tried to correct himself, to realign his gravitational field, but his body refused to obey. The precision strike had disrupted the delicate balance of his neural system, temporarily severing his connection to the energy bands. He could no longer move with control. The Grand Arbiter hesitated for only a moment before raising his hand. Victory to the human. The silence that followed was absolute. Kareth remained floating in the battlefield, his body slowly stabilizing as his neural system rebooted. When he finally managed to steady himself, he did not look at the Arbiter. He did not protest. He turned his gaze to Cole, his expression unreadable. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he placed his lower set of arms against his chest in the ancient Lithari gesture of respect. Cole nodded in return. The match was over, but the impact of what had happened was far greater than anyone had anticipated. The truth was undeniable now. The humans were not winning by chance. They were winning because they were better. The silence in the arena persisted long after the Grand Arbiter declared the victory. The Lithari combat master, who had never known defeat, remained motionless in the zero-gravity battlefield, his forearms slowly drifting back to his sides. The gesture of respect he had given was not lost on the crowd, and for the first time since the trials had begun, the murmurs were not filled with skepticism or rage. They were filled with something far more unsettling: understanding. Nathan Cole floated back to the platform where the human delegation waited. He landed lightly, his balance perfect even in the artificial gravity that had begun to stabilize the battlefield. His expression remained neutral, as if he had simply completed another routine exercise. As if he had not just dismantled one of the galaxy's finest warriors in seconds. The Arbiter's voice resonated across the chamber. The next combatant will be announced shortly, but no one moved. The other delegations, the species that had come, expecting to display their dominance, now hesitated. The Zortal, who had mocked the humans only a day prior, were silent. Their reptilian eyes narrowed in deep contemplation. The Virath, ever logical, exchanged encrypted data streams among themselves, attempting to find a rational explanation for what had occurred. The Lithari, usually so prideful in their agility, no longer spoke at all. The truth had become undeniable. The humans were not winning by accident. They were winning because their understanding of combat exceeded that of every other species present. The first victory could have been dismissed as luck. The second could have been written off as an anomaly. But now, with a third match won in the same way, without weapons, without enhancements, without anything but pure skill, the doubt had been erased. And then the real shift happened. Across the observation decks, messages were exchanged at an unprecedented speed. Commanders from various species sent urgent reports to their homeworlds, detailing the unexpected human victories. Intelligence analysts scrambled to find information, searching for records of human warfare techniques that could explain what had happened. Entire governments, some of which had considered humanity little more than an emerging civilization, now reassessed their stance entirely. The galactic combat trials had always been about showcasing power through technology, brute strength, or tactical supremacy. Humanity had done none of these things. They had not fielded the most advanced weaponry, they had not displayed genetic superiority, they had not relied on battle AI or biomechanical enhancements. They had simply fought, and they had won. Nathan Cole observed the shifting expressions of those around him. He could see it in their eyes, the way they avoided direct contact, the way their bodies tensed as if expecting something inevitable. The fear had begun to set in. A Lithari tactician, one of the high-ranking officials observing from the council's private chamber, leaned forward, his fingers twitching in agitation. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of realization. They don't need our technology. A Viroth intelligence officer exhaled sharply. That's the problem. We need it. They don't. The Zortal general, who had been on the verge of protesting the legitimacy of the matches, fell silent. His clawed hands clenched at his sides, his scales rippling with barely contained frustration. He understood now. This wasn't about the matches. This wasn't about the trials at all. This was about what came after. If humanity could dominate the galaxy's greatest warriors without relying on weapons, then what would happen in actual warfare? What would happen when they integrated their skill with the technology the other species had taken for granted? A single unarmed soldier had already shifted the balance of the trials. What would an entire army do? The Arbiter, sensing the shifting atmosphere, finally spoke. "The trials will continue," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "However, I recognize the concerns that have arisen among the delegations present." He turned his crystalline gaze toward Cole. "Humanity has proven its strength in a way that was unexpected. It is the duty of the trials to showcase power, but it is also the duty of the trials to maintain balance among the galactic order." Cole knew what was coming before the Arbiter even finished speaking. "The Council has decided that the remaining matches will be postponed. The analysis of these battles will determine the future of humanity's participation in the trials." There it was. The official reason sounded neutral, diplomatic even, but Cole recognized the truth behind the words. The Council was afraid. They had seen what humans were capable of, and instead of allowing the trials to continue, they were shutting them down under the guise of evaluation. It wasn't a ban, not yet, but it was close. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. Understood. The Arbiter studied him for a long moment before giving a single nod in return. "This assembly is dismissed." The crowd dispersed, though the tension did not ease. The humans left the arena without resistance, without celebration. There was nothing left to prove. Back in the human barracks, the air was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Cole sat at the edge of a metal bench, his hands clasped in front of him as he listened to the quiet hum of the station. A fellow soldier, Captain Elias Mercer, finally broke the silence. "They're scared." Cole didn't look up. "Of course they are," Mercer exhaled. "We never needed this tournament. It was always for them, not for us. They wanted to see how we measured up, and now they have their answer." Cole leaned back against the cold metal wall. "Yeah. Now they do." The implication hung between them. The trials were over, but the consequences had only just begun. Some species would now seek alliances with humanity, hoping to learn their techniques, to gain their knowledge. Others would attempt to restrict human involvement in military affairs, fearing what their presence would mean on the battlefield. And some, the ones who saw the writing on the wall, would begin planning for a future where humanity was not just another participant in the galactic order, but a dominant force. As pictured in The Dominant Force, Cole closed his eyes for a moment, then stood. "Get some rest. We're going to need it." Mercer nodded and left the room, but as the door closed, Cole remained where he was, staring at the cold metal floor. The galactic combat trials had begun as a way to prove superiority through battle. Instead, they had proven a truth far more dangerous. Humanity had entered the galaxy as an unknown species, underestimated, dismissed. Now, they had left as something else entirely, a warning,